Hi, welcome to Anaprime Recap. You ended up dying and reincarnating in a totally different world where your knowledge is much more advanced than the others. We are in the anime, Parallel World Pharmacy, episodes 1, 2 and 3. At the Federal University in Japan, a young pharmacist works hard on his research and the development of his projects. With no time to rest, Professor Kanji Yakutani has a great recognition by everyone in that place, being considered a genius in the health area. Moved by the sad loss of his younger sister, who eventually died due to a tumor in her brain, he dedicated himself since childhood to be a doctor able to create medicines to cure any kind of disease, but pushing himself to the extreme every day, having a bad diet and few hours of sleep, ended up with a different result than he imagined. One night when he tried to rest for a few minutes, he had a big surprise when he woke up. When he opened his eyes, he found a young woman in front of him calling him Master Falma, and telling him that he had been struck by lightning and was recuperating in his bed. He then realizes that this is not his laboratory. As he leaves his resting place bewildered, Yakutani opens the windows of his room and observes that he is not in an ordinary place. Back in his bed, he sees himself in a small mirror and on seeing his face believes that it could be a dream, memories of his past life, or even that he died from overwork. The young girl next to him asks if his memories are confused and he says yes. Then she introduces herself. Her name is Charlotte and she was always at his service, but he could call her Lot as he always did. The boy, knowing this, asks her to help him remove the bandages that were on his body. While they were doing this process, his servant notices that he has something on his left arm, seeming to be the sacred mark of the god of medicine. Upon seeing this, the young woman begins to pray and thanks for his presence, but Yakutani explains that that mark is called the Lichtenberg figure, a burn made when lightning passes through the skin. She continues her prayer to the god of medicine, believing that it was he who protected her master from the lightning. The boy is still confused by all this and asks Lot to explain more about who he is. The young woman agrees and the two leave the rooms, at which point she explains his whole story as they walk through his huge house. She explains that her master belongs to the Medici family, an aristocratic clan made up of royal apothecaries from the Seine-Fleuve Empire. His relatives are his father, Bruno de' Medici, a powerful archduke, his mother and also Duchess, Beatrice, his younger sister Blanche, and finally his older brother Pals, who is currently studying medicine abroad. Lot also says that her master had plans for his siblings not only as pharmacists, but as practitioners of the divine arts, miraculous feats that can be called works of the gods. The girl is distressed by this. After all, the ability to use works of the gods is a mark of nobility, and her master was able to use divine water arts. She adds that if he is not able to use this power, he may no longer be recognized as a noble, and end up expelled from the estate. Back in his room, the boy tries to manipulate his affinity for water. He remembers that Lauder told him that in order to use his techniques, he must first mentalize the formation of his element, and so Yakutani closes his eyes and in his mind forms the molecular structure of water, composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Immediately the mark on his arm begins to glow and from his hands a powerful jet of water is released. He rushes to his window to release all that water outside and his servant, looking at the scene, realizes that her master has finally managed to remember how to conjure his power. Later, the young man discovers another technique, the ability to produce simple substances and compounds, without the possibility of mixing, such as gold, sodium chloride, and sugar. His right hand uses substance creation, while the left hand uses substance elimination. The only rule for this power is that he knows the chemical structure of the material. At this moment, Lot enters his room happy that he remembered the manipulation with water, but becomes apprehensive afterwards. After all, her master may have forgotten his medicinal knowledge and his father used to ask him questions at dinner time. Knowing this, the two go to a bookcase full of books and Yakutani is informed that the little boy, Falma, had all this knowledge memorized, however it was very old information. Dinner time arrives and the boy goes to his chair. As he sits down, his parents and sister ask him if everything is alright, but he says yes. The Archduke, as usual, decides to ask him a question, and without much difficulty his son answers correctly. His father then tells him that on the day, Falma should return to his classes with Eleonore, and without objection the boy accepts his order. The next morning, his teacher notices that her student is not behaving as usual, acting totally different from normal. His tutor is Eleonore Bonnefoy, the best apprentice of the head of the Medici family. In his class, he is taught that there are 5 attributes of the divine arts, these being fire, water, air, earth and nothingness. In that way they are subdivided into positive and negative. She asks if the boy has any questions so far, and Falma asks what the element, nothing, means. Ellen replies that it is an out-of-the-ordinary element and even though it is on the list, it hasn't been seen for over 300 years, one even wonders if it really existed. Falma goes on with his questioning and asks of what attribute someone would be who could create any substance, but upon hearing this, his teacher says this is impossible and only a god or monster would be able to perform such an act. On his way to practice, Ellen asks him where his divine staff is. The boy doesn't understand very well, but remembers seeing something similar in his room, and then she explains that they serve to amplify his power. Then his teacher demonstrates how to conjure a water lance. Wielding her stick, Ellen releases her energy around it and thus manipulates its element in her stick, then shoots a strong jet of water into the sky, forming a rainbow. After this demonstration, she asks Falma to do the same, but while trying to conjure the technique, he ends up releasing a gigantic whirlwind with an overwhelmingly frightening power. Her teacher ends up falling with the power of that technique. When she gets up, she imagines that her student used all his energy to use this magic. To be sure of this, she makes Falma hold a small stick responsible for measuring a person's energy, and when she sees the result she is disappointed. After all, the energy was so great that he broke the device. Not only that, but the boy could manipulate both negative and positive energy. Returning home, Ellen realizes that the young boy has no shadow, at which point she takes off running in a different direction. The next day, Archduke Bruno tells Falma that Eleanor was ill and running a high fever, asking his son to give her a letter with a prescription. Upon arriving at her home, the boy is surprised by his teacher who, still afraid, receives him dressed in armor. The young pharmacist says that she should not worry, after all he was not wearing any divine staff. Ellen is grateful, but at the same time terrified that it might contain poison, but the boy comforts her by saying that there is nothing that will harm her in the medicines. Falma says he wants to learn even more from his teacher's lessons, but she refuses, saying that he is the incarnation of the god of medicine. He continues and says that he is only a human and that he needs her teachings. After all, he doesn't understand very well how the divine art works and needs his tutor to help him with his difficulties. However, he understands her point of view and apologizes for what happened, handing her a bouquet of flowers, thanking her for having helped him all this time, after which he returns to his house. The next day, while strolling through the estate's garden, Falma is surprised by the return of his teacher who, when asked about her return, explains that if she does not help her student, he might lose control of his divine art, as a result of which he could blow up the imperial city. She finally thanks him for the medicine, saying that the strange medicine he took worked faster than that of her master. Ellen says that her classes and training will be done on a desert island, so as not to cause damage to nearby places, and so the two begin to use the divine art, going through a long process of trial and error. Upon returning to his property, Falma, using his ocular power that identifies any type of illness, observes that the employees who worked in his house all had various types of illnesses, some curable and others incurable. Analyzing everyone, he kept writing everything down in his notebook. Having an advanced knowledge for that century, the young apothecary tries to help everyone he can, so he starts to produce a medicine for the problem that his servant Lot has on his hands. It was a ragatiform eczema. So Falma conjures up all the necessary materials and after much mixing, finally creates a heparinoid moisturizing cream to solve Lot's problem. As he hands it to her, the girl thanks him and is extremely moved. The young woman asks if she can share the cream with other people who have the same problem, but the boy says he will prepare specified medicines for each employee on the estate. And so he does, delivering medicines to each person who has some kind of problem. Lot says that this attitude is very kind because the commoners never receive care from the aristocrats. After all, they only serve the elite. The next morning, while going in for breakfast, Falma notices that his sister Blanche is not at the table, and immediately asks his parents the reason for her absence. Her father replies that she has contracted chickenpox and for this reason will be isolated from all the family, being under the care of only a few employees. Upon hearing the news, the boy goes to the laboratory a short time later in order to create something that can help his sister. After thinking about a medicine suitable for her age, he comes to the conclusion that the most suitable is acyclovir, which would make her get better much faster. He sneaks into her room and tries to give her the medicine, but she says it might be bitter and she doesn't want it, so he suggests putting it together with a macaron, thus getting her medicated. Then Blanche questions him, saying that her father said there was no medicine for her illness, but her brother replies that this is a new recipe from a book and that's why her father hadn't seen it before. They spend a long time together and the little girl questions him, saying that he was not like this before, he never had time to play or talk to her properly. Anyway, she was feeling happy at that moment. At that moment, Yakutani remembers the figure of his sister and without saying anything, he prefers to remain silent. A few days later, the father of the family realizes that his daughter has made an extremely fast recovery. While in his laboratory creating a microscope, Falma is called to go to his father's presence. When he arrives at the place, he is informed that he must leave immediately as he was dealing with an emergency call from the Majesty, the Empress. The patriarch says that she is very sick and they need to go to her immediately. The boy asks what disease the Majesty has, but his father replies that he cannot say yet in that place. When they arrive at her palace, they are quickly met by the chief physician, Claude, who tells them that the Empress' situation is serious, as her lungs may not hold out much longer. When they enter the hall, several people are discussing the matter and Falma and his father are taken to the place where the Majesty was resting, and when they see her they realize that her situation is extremely serious. Bruno takes a sample of Her Majesty Elizabeth II's blood, analyzes it, and talks to other pharmacists, and they come to the conclusion that she would not survive for long. So the renowned doctor makes a portion with mandrake so that it could act as an anesthetic, but it would not solve the problem. Falma, observing that situation, finally decides to help her, using his eye power to see that the woman's illness originates in her lungs, and so he comes to the conclusion that she suffers from tuberculosis. He approaches her bed and tells her that he can cure her disease. Everyone in the room is apprehensive about this insinuation, but the boy insists that he knows the name of the disease and will probably be able to cure it. The Majesty, with a vote of confidence, puts all her hopes in the boy. He thanks her and in a locked room with an ice block, begins the process of creating the medicine, but is interrupted by his father who destroys the door with an incredible power of air. He tells his son that there is no medicine to cure the White Plague, at which point Falma is impressed because his father already knew what the Majesty's disease was, and he did not use any secret technique to identify it, being truly an elite pharmacist. The boy insists on saying that he knows how to create a new medicine and that his father should also take it. After all, he already had a continuous cough. Without caring about his presence, the young pharmacist continues his conjuration, but the formula he carries in his hands is torn by a strong jet of water. Bruno claims that there are no remedies for this and what his son was trying to do was actually poison. Angry at the situation and wanting to end it all, he conjures his ice sword dance technique and unleashes several shots of ice in his son's direction. Falma defends himself by creating a protective barrier and then creates a huge wall of ice that separates him from his father. The pharmacist is incredulous to see that scene because his son conjured the power without the aid of any staff or words to invoke it. At that moment he raises the hypothesis that this is not his son. Again he contests him by asking him how he acquired so much knowledge. The boy answers him by saying that it was from the day he was struck by lightning on his head and that in the end he considers himself in a way his son. When he finishes the medicine, Falma enters the room with part of his face covered with a cloth in order not to contract tuberculosis, but for the people in the room, this was a lack of respect for the Empress. At this point his father is questioned by the palace chief physician about his son's attitudes, but the man says that he trusts Falma and believes that his knowledge is far more advanced than anyone else in that place. The boy, before starting the medication process, asks the Majesty to use the microscope that he had created so that she could see what was present in her cough. When the woman looks, she notices several creatures she has never seen before in her life, and then she is frightened to see them. She asks Claude to look too, and when he uses the microscope, he is able to identify several insects, while others see them and think they are caterpillars, wondering if they are really living beings. The boy then explains that those not microorganisms act like bacteria and are responsible for causing the White Plague disease, but with his new medicine, tuberculosis will no longer be an incurable disease and everyone will be able to get proper treatment. Falma explains that the medication process takes about 6 months, but after that she will be completely cured. Everyone is impressed with the news and at this point they decide to ask about many others to the young pharmacist, who does not spare his answers to the questions and doubts. On the way back home, Falma's father is surprised by his son's attitudes. After all, he did not act this way before the accident, but as he analyzes part of his trajectory as a father, he realizes that the one standing in front of him is not really his son. When they finally arrive at his estate, the boy gives his father the same medicine that he gave to his Majesty, in order to alleviate the disease that he also had. The Archduke thanks him and says that his son's level is more advanced than his own. The young man denies the statement, saying that he is still an apprentice and will need to be mentored many more times by his teacher. So, what did you think of this anime? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like it and subscribe for more anime recaps. See you next time.